Greetings and shalom. So today we're going to be looking at this book, The Black Rulers, Military Leaders, Clergy and Moors Who Saved Medieval Europe by Rufus Jimerson. They do not teach this type of history in the public schools education system. It goes against historical narrative because they want you to believe that you were, quote unquote, slaves or enslaved and you were brought here in 1619. So now we're on page 185, I do believe, in the States. The mid-1600s became a turning point in the struggle to overturn African hegemony and rule in Europe. The 30 Years' Wars resulted in the defeat of Black Catholics by the white insurgent underclass. The wars created a climate of hate towards Black people that persisted in the racial animus still alive today among descendants of Europeans that fled to America to escape the tyranny. A number of whites today deeply resent Blacks, particularly if they gain authority over them like President Obama. Most do not live with or associate with Blacks. Obviously, Blacks in a nation supposedly based on equal opportunity are collectively worse off than whites and other non-white groups. There has to be a reason for this deep-seated hatred. For those who do not have a personal experience of conflict with Blacks, it is not enough to say bias is taught by family and friends, even though it is a factor. The roots of this intergenerational hatred or resentment against Blacks, particularly their rule, is a link to why their families fled from a Europe ruled by Black despotic rulers. Evidence displayed indicates their forefathers and foremothers fled to America to escape the absolute rule of Black royals that used both the church and state to control them. Right here it states the 30 Years' War is one of the greatest conflicts in European history. It consisted of a series of declared and undeclared wars which raged on between 1618 and 1648 throughout Central Europe. The Habsburgs under Holy Roman Emperors Ferdinand II and Ferdinand III with their Spanish cousins were pitted against the English Netherlands, France, and Sweden. Besides being a covert war against Black rule, it was an overt war among Catholics, Lutherans, and Calvinists. Christian IV of Denmark led the anti-Habsburg alliance. The Peace of Westphalia ended the war. The Holy Roman Empire lost territorial control over the German states. German states won the right to exercise religious freedom and neutrality from control exercised by the Catholic Church. Right here it also states the 30 Years' War marked the first successful effort to dispose of the autocratic Black rulers and their hegemony over the West. Okay. Right here, the white masses demanded a government based on their consent rather the will of a despotic Black ruler legitimized as such by the Roman Catholic Church controlled by his cousins ruling the Holy Roman Empire, France and Spain. Okay, right here we have image 71, Charles V, another Black Holy Roman Emperor, 1500 through 1558. Okay. Page 188. Efforts to whiten all evidence of their images surged from the enslavement of the Africans in the 17th century and peaked during the era of scientific racism that peaked during the 19th century. Only recently, the Brits have admitted to being ruled by Black Moors up until the modern era. The admissions identified by realhistory.com were barely audible and detectable to the general public. These significant British royals included James I, who'd hand the Bible translated into English for his literate subjects to read, Charles Stuart, nicknamed Black Boy, and Anne, the last of the Stuarts. Now we're at this book, Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1, page 16. Okay. And it states, while a fourth, as we see hints, that the home, if not the cradle of the white race was Europe, but there seems little probability of any of these theories, meaning what? It's never been proven, ever becoming substantiated. We have just seen that many scientific men hold that there are some grounds for believing that portions, at least, of Europe have been formerly been inhabited by black, tawny, and copper-colored races. And we are also learning that the white race has not been always confined to the Eastern Hemisphere. Okay? So we were in these lands before them. Okay? Of course, when you think of European, you think of so-called white or Caucasian, because of, our modern society. But in that time period, yes, we were in all those lands because we were the dominant society. Now we're on page 13, and it states, in addition to the black or brown and yellow races already spoken as a prehistoric Europeans, there is a theory that a copper-colored race closely akin to some branches of American Indians once inhabited Europe, or rather the southern parts of Europe and North Africa. Okay, now we're at origin of the Anglo-Saxon race. Okay, I read this book a lot of times as well. Okay, we're going to go to the chapter that states our dark forefathers, because the original Saxons were so-called black. Chapter 7, our darker forefathers. Now this is a so-called white man or Caucasian with this information, or he's stating this information. Okay, so let's see what he says. Let's start at page 73. From what has been said of the presence of broad-headed people of a brunette type, it's talking about the skin complexion based on the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, type in parts of Norway among the much more numerous long-headed people of a fair complexion who form the bulk of the Norwegian nation, it will be seen that the facts point to an early broad-headed brown race, some of whom settled on the Norwegian coast, the long-headed fair race of the typical Norse variety having perhaps subconsciously conquered them. In any case, we find evidence sufficient to justify the inference that probably the early broad-headed people were brown. Okay, the same result is obtained by the study of the broad-headed people of Central Europe at the present day, descendants presumably of the old Alpine brown race. Okay, black is a misnomer. Okay, it's a byword. When we look at our skin complexions, there are various shades of brown. The same evidence is afforded by the remnant of the Wends, whose skulls are broad and whose complexions are more or less brown at the present day, notwithstanding their fusion with the Germans. Okay, we have thus existing in Norway and parts of Germany at the present time people whose ethnological characteristics appear to agree with those of a section of the Anglo-Saxon people in England. It does not, of course, admit of proof that the broad-headed skulls which occur in a small minority in Anglo-Saxon cemeteries were skulls of people of a brunette complexion. Okay? People get thrown off by that word. Similarly, we are unable to prove that the people who are called Bronneren, or Brunning in Saxon charters or other documents were broad-headed, but in view of the ethnological survival to the present day in various parts of North Europe, from which our Anglo-Saxon forefathers came, which were dark or so-called black, or broad-headed people of the brunette type, we can point in England to the fact that broad skulls are found in Anglo-Saxon graves, and to the historical fact that they were brown people in England during the Anglo-Saxon period. And there the evidence must be left. It may, however, be borne in mind that as brown passes into dark brown or black, the literary evidence concerning brown Anglo-Saxons is strengthened by that relating to the black men or to those designated by the old brown black war Stuart, okay, James Stuart, okay, or King James, and in some cases perhaps even the old word dun, okay. Now we're on page 67, surnames, okay. This consideration of the probable origin of the great proportion of brunettes, meaning what? Brown complexion, okay, the skin, in two of South Midland counties of England leads us to that of color names as surnames and place names, which may probably have been derived from their original settlers. For example, there is the common name Brown. This has been derived from the Anglo-Saxon braun, signifying brown. It is not reasonable to doubt that when our forefathers called a man brawn or brown, they gave him this name as descriptive of his brown complexion. Okay? And how do we know that? So we're in this book, again, Ancient and Modern Britons, Volume 1. Okay, let's look up surnames. The value of surnames, okay? Let's just read this right here, okay? And yet, in both cases, the male descendants would bear the surname first given to their remote authors, a surname signifying the black man. So now we're at the etymology of the word surname now. 13th century additional name, a name, title, or epithet added to a person's baptismal or Christian name. From sur above, from Latin super, see sir, name. The word modeled or English from on Anglo-French surname, early 14th century, a variant of Old French surnom, from sur over, nom, name. Surnoun also was used in Middle English, usually derived from a quality, achievement, or place. The surnames tended to be passed down and became family names. Hence, the word took the sense of a family's name, a last name, by the late 14th century. This also states hereditary surnames existed among Norman nobility in England in early 12th century. We know that the Normans were so-called black. They were Negroes. Among the common people, they began to be used by the 13th century, increasingly frequent until near universal by the end of the 14th century. The process was later in the north of England than the south. The fact is that most of our surnames are so old that while they argue with considerable force that this or that man is descended from such and such a race, they give us no help in finding out the predominating blood, okay? Nevertheless, the name exists, and with those of topography and of usage already quoted, and with many a record in written and oral history, they emphatically tell us of a large section of our ancestry whose complexion was black. Okay. So now we're on page 173, and it states, Scotland was overrun in one district by Moors of the 15th century, but 5 centuries earlier, the kings of Alpin were Moors, and one of the most celebrated of these, Kenneth or Niger or Dub, ruled over certain districts known as the 3 black divisions, okay? Number 1, England. Number 2, North Ireland. Number 3, Scotland / the Wales. How long before and after that the ascendancy remained with his swarthy nation, okay? And what were the probable fluctuations of color throughout the island? It is impossible to ascertain and premature to discuss, but at any rate, the Moorish races, Nakfoso, Numan, Pictos, were among the chief opponents of the Romans when they marched through Britain 1800 years ago, okay? James I, 1566 to 1625, ruled Great Britain until his death. He was the first ruler from the house of Stuart. King James succeeded Queen Elizabeth after her death. He became the first British monarch to rule both England and Scotland. James authorized the settlement of Jamestown, the first colony of the 13 colonies, in 1606, which would become states after winning their independence in 1781. Okay. Of course, image 76, King James I, who had the Bible accurately translated. Okay. Looks like a so-called black man to me. And let's not get on the colorisms and stuff. Got people over here making comments like swarthy means tan and all this other nonsense. Like I said, black is a byword. People of color or so-called black Negroes come in all various shades of brown, to fair, to pale. Look at Sinbad, for crying out loud. We're not all the same complexion. And a lot of these prejudiced or racist idiots don't understand that shit because they've been taught lies by their public fools education system. Image 77, Black King Charles Stuart of England, 1630 through 1685. You also got a lot of so-called whites running around here, or Caucasians running around here with Negro ancestry. Okay, they were created by Negroes, and of course, through the whitewashing or intermixture or whatnot. Okay, yeah. They'll never want to admit that, though. Image 78, Moorish King William III of Scotland, England, and Wales. Okay. Page 192, it states, blacks rule through the Holy Roman, Eastern Orthodox, and Russian imperial succession persisted through the 19th century and 20th century. Okay. Right here it states, Holy Roman Empress Maria Theresa, 1717 through 1780, was also a significant ruler that would be considered black today under the one-drop rule. Okay. So, I mean, we're only going by what your, current laws or your racist ideology, what it meant about history. Okay. Right here it states, Egmond Codfried's theory that that blue blood is black blood, claiming that blacks under the West one-drop rule reigned over Europe as royals through the Middle Ages and the early modern era. He points out that these royals, nobles, and bourgeoisie elites had brown and black complexions and Afrocoid features in contrast to their white subjects, in evidence drawn from paintings, drawings, statues, busts, and prints.
Okay, now this room looks fine, but I want a whole new floor put in that entryway.
Now, this scene right here in the Jeffersons, or Jefferson's fairy tale, we know that this was not a fairy tale according to real history. They know about the black rulership, about the black nobility, and, the black oppression and so forth. But, of course, this is not taught in modern schools or the education system. We're only taught one narrative about our people, and I think you already know what that is.
This time I want it made out of solid gold. This silver shows up all the dirty heel marks.
Yes, sir.
Now, there's something else that's not right with this place. Hey, Weezy! Yes, mother!
And as you can see right here, we have the Black Queen, or Wheezy. But notice what she's wearing. Look at her garments or attire. Okay. Now, when you look at a book called The Black Image in Western Art, there are a lot of pictures, and I think it's a series of books, but you see a lot of the black queens dressed in the same garments or attire.
Don't you think this castle is getting too small for us?
Too small?
Why, yes. Just this morning I was touring the West Wing, and I got back here before dark. The horse was going at full gallop, too.
Well, you've got to admit we are better off now than when we lived back in the land of Harlem.
No, of course.
Remember how poor we were?
Oh, yes. We were so poor, even our roaches were starving to death. But that's all behind us now. Let's feast to celebrate.
Good idea.
Bring in the maid in waiting.
George, why do you call Florence the maid in waiting?
Because I've been waiting for her to act like a maid ever since she's been here.
Codfried believes the evidence is enough to facilitate his own museum dedicated to validating his theory. It's not really a theory. It has been proven. There's so many books out here talking about the black rulership. It's just over here in La La Land, it will never get the light of day. They don't want people to, especially them, the Edomites or the Caucasians, don't want to relive that time period. Okay. Let's see what it also states. Okay, right here. As an explanation for this resentment-based hatred, Codfried cites APA's 1975 findings that European whites were once ruled and despotically oppressed by blacks who brought them civilization and Christianity. Okay, I mean, the Moors did teach them how to bathe and how to clean themselves, and there's many other books on that. These blacks encompass Europe's nobility, who identified themselves as blue blood, actually descended from black Moor progenitors, reinforced by inbreeding. Okay. Right here it states, back to the old world, the European royal families were a fixed mulatto race with brown and black complexions, with some looking more African, Asian, or white. The underclass white majority were called grays or pinks and looked down upon by these blue bloods. The ruling Moorish lineage gave them privileges, defiled the underclass. Most of the white underclass European were illiterate, since education was a privilege privy to the black nobility, who could afford tutoring and or admissions to Latin and Greek private academies. The liberal advocates of the Protestant Reformation, who demanded and eventually achieved publicly funded schools using books in a common language. See, that's why the Bible says there's nothing new under the sun. The oppression of what our people did to them, they've been doing this in America for the longest. Okay. And we always wonder, well, why do people treat us like this? Why do people hate us? Well, now you know. Now you know. Okay. And what the Most High is going to do to them, they don't know. But if you listen to one of these brothers long enough, you will know. Right here it states, the civilization and Christianity which thrived in Europe was ruled by black overlords. Respectively, the inbred European royal that ruled the state and church were kneeling down to icons and artifacts of a black god, Messiah, disciples and saints and shrines, inaccessible or remotely located from scrutiny by commoners. Right here it states, from 1760 onward, the notion of human races was created and promoted by white Europeans trying to undermine and overcome the despotic rule of their black overlords. Okay. Under their racist and exophobic perspective, nations were defined by skin color. Okay. That's why J.A. Rogers states, nature knows no color line. But through their revisionism, nations were defined by skin color. Whites were regarded as superior humans, while blacks were portrayed as being at the bottom of the human evolutionary ladder. To justify this perspective, that is contrary to Codfried's image of an adorned mixed race, royals, clergy, and faith figures were whitened. Portraying this distortion of the truth as fact falls under the heading of revisionism. It was used to hide an important historical fact that Europe was ruled by a black identified nobility and royal elite. Codfried's claim that the invention of scientific racism taxonomy of the races was necessary to verify white supremacy. Scientific racism hide that the French Revolution 1789 through 1795 represented exploited whites overturning their black overlords. Okay. And Napoleon was of a mixed race general. Okay. Right here it states racism that whitened fake portraits of black kings and queens is, in effect, a liberation ideology to free whites who were indoctrinated to believe that blacks were superior beings. Okay. Right here. These resentful whites included the forefathers and foremothers of those who immigrated to America to escape persecution in Europe, ruled by black nobles controlling both church and state. This is why they all fled to the Americas. Okay.